Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Radio KBE. Today's topic is going to be Zach Lavine and the rumors that we've been hearing about him. The rumors that we've been hearing about him possibly leaving the Bulls, maybe not leaving the Bulls, and basically what direction that if that opens up an avenue or not for the Lakers when it comes to just is it an avenue that we can pursue. So today what we're going to talk about is specifically Zach and some maneuvers. One of the things I think that's really interesting about this entire conversation is that the idea has genuinely been that just adding a guy like Zach will solve all of the Lakers' issues. And I'm not quite sure that is specifically going to solve all of the issues. But the interesting part is the fact that he's clutch is obviously going to, and we know LeBron is clutch, and we know Anthony Davis is clutch. We know Rich Paul has some level of influence with the Lakers. Not necessarily full decision making, but he has some influence. And the fact that Zach Lavine loves Los Angeles. It helps that he's told TMZ in off just as he's just sort of walking around and stuff like that he loves LA. He lives in LA. Zach has played for UCLA. If you remember, the guy that we added last season, Russell Westbrook, sort of hits on those parameters too as well. But obviously Zach is a better fit because of his ability to shoot the ball. He has some playmaking ability too, likes the mid-range, a lot of what's going on. Now, for this episode, I want to discuss the possibility of adding Zach, whether it's possible, probable, that sort of thing. And one of the things I just want to kind of caution fans as I do this process is I'm not trying to say that it's going to happen or it's not going to happen. But what I do want to say is if it doesn't happen, there's probably evidence that we have historically that we can look at to sort of make an educated decision on what the avenues are. And I think the best way to go about doing this is to just kind of think about it historically and look at it from a Chicago Bulls perspective too as well, not just the Lakers perspective, because a lot of times if we just do it from a Lakers perspective, there's easy reasons to say, oh, Zach is going to end up in LA. So I'll pull up a couple things for us to look at, but that'll be the theme of this episode. Just Zach, whether him coming to LA is a possibility, isn't a possibility, and just sort of the things that are involved with him making that decision when it comes to, just essentially when it comes to making that decision. So first and foremost, I think the most important thing that we have to understand is that the only way for the Lakers to get Zach Lavine is through a sign and trade. There's no other way for them to get him. He would have to, so that would involve him having to have a discussion with the Bulls front office, tell the Bulls front office that there's nothing that they can do that would make him want to come back there. And if there's nothing that they can do to make them want to come back there, then it turns into I would like to go to this team, XYZ, whatever team he wants to go to. And if he says that to them, or Rich Paul says that to them on behalf of Zach, then the Bulls also have to acquiesce that. They have to be willing to want to sign and trade him to somebody else. If and we have to assume that the teams that he picks as destinations are teams that have somebody that the Bulls want that to send back to as well. So this is not necessarily something that is when we think about leverage and we think about how leverage works in these negotiations and stuff like that. It's not necessarily the Bulls are at the mercy of Zach Lavine. A lot of times we think that players can kind of hold other teams over the barrel, but there are teams out there and there are GMs and obviously Carney Silvas, who is I think he's the executive of player basketball operations. I'm not quite sure if he's the GM also, but it's entirely possible that he goes and he talks to Bulls ownership, and Bulls ownership says, look, we don't need the traded player exception. We don't want to bring back any players that we don't actually want just for the sake of getting something out of this Zach trade. So they don't have to do that. There's no obligation to a team to do that. it's a different conversation when we talk about asset management and stuff like that. But there's no reason for that to happen. So this idea of a team having leverage or not having leverage, I think in these sort of conversations, I think it matters more when you're like the very upper tier superstar sort of player. So if it's LeBron James, if it's Kawhi Leonard, if it's Giannis, if it's Kevin Durant, like those are the players that you need to have leverage because they are franchise changing players. Like if they want to go to another team, you want to try and get something back for them because they're just on a different stratosphere as players. I don't know if Zach falls into that category, and that's why I'm always kind of cautious about the conversation about leverage because as fans we think to ourselves that front offices want they want to do asset management and stuff like that, but if the Bulls don't want to, they don't have to. And we've seen front offices take lesser deals just to get the player, like just to not be forced into doing something that they don't want to do, right? Like the Greg Popovich, the San Antonio Spurs trading Kawhi to the Toronto Raptors is probably the perfect example of that. Whether it was valid or not that Kawhi wanted to come to Los Angeles, which is what I believe was originally said, no matter what deal the Lakers offered to the San Antonio Spurs, there was no obligation to do it. Like they didn't have to do it. And that's basically what they did. They took a lesser deal, sent them to Toronto, and then Kawhi left in free agency anyways and ended up going to getting back to Los Angeles no matter what. So in hindsight, when you think about it, San Antonio probably should have taken the deal that they were being offered, and that deal ended up being sent for Anthony Davis instead. But like I said, it's these sort of situations are you never know what actually matters. Zach originally signed a restricted free agent agreement, I believe. When he got traded to the Bulls, he signed a restricted free agent sheet with the Sacramento Kings, which the Bulls matched, and they kept him. So it was for about like 20, I think it was an $80 million deal. So this is Zach's, it's probably going to be his biggest payday ever. So you're talking about a 4 or 5 year contract, or in the Bulls' case, it's a 5 year contract where he's going to get $200 million from the Bulls, and then if he doesn't do it, he can sign for like 4 years and 157 with another team, and he can always re-up after 4 years. He could take like a 3. There's different ways that he could do it, right? He could take a 3+1. He could take a straight 4 years guaranteed, or he can take something different, some other variation if he wants to take it with the Bulls. So when it comes to conversations about leverage, the one thing that I think fans in general should understand when it comes to Rich Paul and just kind of the way I think he operates, it's whatever the player wants. It's what the player wants the most. And so if a player wants to go somewhere else, they really, really want to go somewhere else, they really want to be back in Los Angeles or whatever it is, Rich Paul will make that happen. It doesn't matter where that player plays. It could be Philadelphia with Ben Simmons. It could be Chicago with Zach Lavine. It could be New Orleans with Anthony Davis. Like if a player wants, whatever the player wants is what Rich Paul does. And I think that's probably what, and this is a separate conversation, but that's probably why a lot of front offices, at least the ones that don't like Rich Paul and clutch sports in general, they don't like him. Because he always prioritizes what the player wants first. And whatever you hear on Twitter about like, oh, he's trying to reroute players to help LeBron, and it's almost a conspiracy level, like Skip Bayless, InfoWars, like conspiracy level stuff that you see on Twitter. That's not reality. He prioritizes what the player wants. And if the player wants to leave because he wants to be back home, Rich Paul will do that. If the player wants to get as much money as they possibly can on the market, Rich Paul will do that as well. And when you think about Zach Lavine's situation, the fact that he was basically a top 5 shooting guard, outside of before his knee injury and stuff, like he was having a tremendous season. The Bulls were a fantastic team. They got demolished by injuries. Regardless of how their season ended in the playoffs, they were a great team. A lot of people didn't see them being as successful as they were this season, and the style of play was very exciting. It was an exciting brand of basketball to watch. A lot of mid-range, a lot of skill, but Bag Twitter probably loved them. Their Bag Twitter's probably favorite team this season. especially with what happened with the Nets. That their Bulls are probably the next best substitute. So the regular season was pretty good up until injuries, and so with this team, or in Zach's situation specifically, I don't think it's an environment thing. I don't think it's a priority thing. I don't think it's a competitiveness thing. I think when he looks at this situation, he's looking at maximizing how much money he can make. And so everything that we've heard from the Bulls is that they're going to offer him those $200 million, right? They're not going to waffle around about it. He is getting Zach was scheduled to get arthroscopic surgery on the same knee that he tore his ACL, just to clean it up. I've torn my ACL. I probably need arthroscopic surgery. I've torn my ACL, both ACLs in both of my knees, reconstructed, rehab, got back to playing basketball again. Obviously not at the level of an NBA player, but like I don't think that's going to affect their decision. Like that's routine stuff that people have to do to take care of them. I don't think the situation with Lonzo and what's happening with him and the concern about him and his injury, his long-term fit, like it impacted the Bulls significantly that he got hurt, because he was that facilitator that was getting the ball out quickly for DeMar and Zach. I think that was a big deal. So I think in reality, there's probably two things that Zach is probably evaluating this entire, whether he stays with Chicago or not, he's evaluating it by. And I think the first thing that Zach is probably evaluating it by is, are they going to give me all the money that I want, which is the full $200 million? I think they're going to do that. I don't think, from an asset management perspective, I don't think the Bulls are going to mess around. $200 million is still okay. It's not that much money. His cap amount is going to start at about $36 million a year. The Bulls, if I'm not mistaken, they're at about $100 million of actual cap next year before Zach's extension. So the extension will put him at about $136 million, which is over the cap, but still under the luxury tax. So they'll have some wiggle room if they want to add certain players and stuff like that. But for the most part, they're not into the luxury tax just yet. And remember, they can still move guys around if they need to get farther under the cap or to just do different stuff if they want to do it. So I don't think money is the issue for the Bulls. It just doesn't make any sense for them to let him walk over money. So that's one thing. That's just scratch off. The other thing that has been a little bit interesting, that I don't know how valid it is, if it's valid or not, has been this conversation about DeMar DeRozan kind of getting like this MVP love for the Bulls, while Zach Lavine was kind of off to the wayside. It's a small thing that I think was mentioned at the end of the season. And I had never heard of it. I had never heard anything about it, at least everything that I had read, during the season, like as if there was friction between those two. But then for it to pop up at the end of the season, I thought it was sort of interesting. I don't know if there's actual friction between those two. I don't think there is. I don't think DeMar is there to like take the limelight away from Zach. I think that's just how he plays. I think Billy Donovan probably runs the stuff that he wants to run, and whoever's able. I think Zach's knee injury pushed DeMar into the limelight more, because Zach was just not able to do stuff to the same degree, which is why he's getting surgery. I think if Zach was fully healthy, some of those possessions probably would have gone to Zach at the end of the season. But again, who knows how those things sort of work? But I remember hearing that. So that's really the only thing I could point at, right? That's really the only thing I could point at and say, okay, would he leave because of that? Would he leave because DeMar was getting the ball at the end of games, and DeMar hit game winners, and he was getting MVP love after the All-Star break because he hitting game winners, and he had so many big scoring moments and stuff like that. So that's something that I thought was a little interesting, but I'm not sure it's enough. And so when it comes to this entire conversation about getting Zach and the Lakers possibly acquiring him, the Lakers can't offer more money than the Bulls can, and the Bulls are going to offer him everything he wants money-wise. So we don't have an advantage in that perspective. The only advantage I think the Lakers have is if Zach feels that he's not going to have a chance to contend with the Bulls and feels like he has a better chance of contention with the Lakers, that's one thing that plays in the Lakers' favor. Obviously because of LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and I would imagine Russ is probably going to get traded in order to acquire Zach. if you follow Eric Pincus, who writes for Bleacher Report, he's written up a whole bunch of different ideas and stuff like that for how the Lakers could reroute Russ to OKC and get Zach and that sort of thing. But again, the Bulls have to, it would have to be a situation where Zach very explicitly tells the Bulls, I don't want to be here, no matter what. I want to go to LA. And then LA tries to find a way. But again, LA doesn't have a ton of assets. So like the Bulls are in similar to the situation that New Orleans was in when they had Anthony Davis and the Lakers were trying to get Anthony Davis. The Bulls can extract as much as they possibly can. And remember, Rich Paul is going to do what Zach wants. So the only way Zach makes it to LA is he has to tell Rich Paul, LA is the place I want to be, no matter what. That's the only way that happens. There's no other way that happens. So if that isn't the number one thing for Zach, I don't know if he ends up in LA. But who knows? Everything is fluid. You never know how those negotiations go. You never know how those conversations go. So it'll be interesting. So if he really, really wants to be back in his hometown, which he may, that's really the only way I think it'll happen. Can the Lakers make it happen? For sure. There's a lot of people, the real question is how much does it cost for something like that to happen? And, how many picks need to be sent out, who needs to be moved around, that sort of thing. Now, the other thing is also this. When it comes to this entire conversation about Zach getting signed and traded to the Lakers, the one thing that I think all fans need to understand is the Lakers will be hard capped. So the whole thing that happened this prior season about whether the Lakers could have gotten DeMar DeRozan to LA, and why didn't they get DeMar DeRozan to LA? Like they can get Zach, but they will be hard capped, which means that we won't be able to spend past $155 million. And the easiest way for me to describe this to anybody who doesn't understand what the hard cap is, you cannot go past that number no matter what. There is no exception that allows you to go past that number. There is nothing that allows you to go past that number. So once your team is hard capped, and that number is about $5 to $6 million above the luxury tax line, once the team gets hard capped, that's it. Like you have to leave room for yourself underneath the hard cap so that in case you have to make a trade deadline trade or if you need to add a vet minimum on a buyout or something like that, you have to account for that in advance. You can't just make it happen. So there's no way you can cross that number. So if you're a Laker fan that wants the Lakers to spend unlimited amounts of money, like there should be no cap, there should be no restriction on how much money you pay. That is a serious thing that you have to be aware of. Like that is something that you have to be aware of if you're trying to trade for Zach Lavine. Like it is going to cap how much money you can spend. This season alone, the Warriors are spending about $175 million in payroll, and they're paying another $175 million in tax, if I'm not mistaken. They're paying close to $300 million, over $300 million in luxury tax and payroll to win a championship. That's expensive. I'm sure fans out there will say that, hey, these are billionaires, they can afford it, for sure. But at the same time, billionaires don't become billionaires by spending that kind of money to win a championship. If that was the case, then I think if there's a direct correlation between those two things, I think that would be the common stance that all owners would take. But in the Warriors' case, they had no choice but to go in that direction because for 2 years they spent a decent amount of money in luxury tax with no results. You're seeing that similar situation with the Clippers. Their owner is spending a significant amount of luxury tax money, but they haven't won a championship yet. At some point, they'll have to reassess if next year they don't win or the year after they don't win. Spending power is one thing, but spending power with no results is another thing. And so for the Lakers, if you're a Lakers fan who's been insistent that the Lakers shouldn't cap themselves from being able to spend a certain amount of money, then that Zach Lavine trade looks a little bit different. You can't make that. You can't make the Zach Lavine trade because you will be hard capped. And look, maybe that's okay. Maybe you believe that the front office can make excellent moves within the margins. Maybe the new coach that comes in has a different philosophy that encourages wings, and that's just the case. So there are different parts of this that fans should be aware of. And it is important to understand those things, because if you don't, then you'll start complaining during the season about the front office again. So if you're following along, the only way Zach gets to LA is his number one priority, because we know how Rich Paul operates. He takes care of his clients. He prioritizes what they prioritize. It has to be that Zach wants to be in LA. If he doesn't want to be in LA and that's not his number one thing, he's not going to be in LA. Doesn't have anything to do with the front office. Doesn't have anything to do with the Lakers front office, Bulls front office, nothing. Zach has to want to be in LA. And I know he said stuff to TMZ. I know he's from UCLA. But as a Laker fan, I just want to caution other fans. This using the Lakers as a way to, as the big boogeyman in free agency is very common. Kawhi did it. Paul George did it. Zach Lavine did it. Every single player, almost every single player in the NBA, to some degree, will mention wanting to go to the Lakers so they can get maximum value out of their contract. The Lakers have historically always been the boogeyman in free agency for players. So I don't want to say don't get your hopes up, but I just consider historical precedents. And so if Zach wants to be in LA, he can be in LA. It's just up to him. That has to be the thing that he wants to do, essentially what Anthony Davis did. Now, the other thing is Zach has to want to be in LA, and the other thing is you have to be, if you want Zach in LA as a fan, as a front office, as a fan, I won't talk about the front office just yet, you have to be okay with being hard capped. That's just the way it works. There's nothing else to it. And you have to be okay with what cost it takes to get Zach. I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's a 2027 pick, the 29 pick. I don't know. I don't know what the leverage is in that situation for the Lakers. But that's the way I would see it. So if you're okay with the cost it takes, if you're okay with the hard cap, if you're okay with, and Zach is okay with coming to LA and foregoing the amount of money that he's going to be foregoing by not taking the years with the Bulls, then it can happen. But there's some part of this that I think people are not paying attention to, and it's a different perspective that I'm the way I always think of these situations is, is there something else to this? Is there another direction that the Lakers could go in or could use as an advantage to themselves? And so one of the things I wanted to bring up was this idea that if Zach stays in with Chicago, what else may Chicago do? Would Chicago just run everything back the way that they normally did? Or is this also possibly a leverage play that's going on? And so the thing that I'm trying to figure out is what direction this whole situation will go in. So let's say Chicago wants to, Zach stays in Chicago. Let's say he's leveraging this whole situation to get the maximum amount of money. He's using the Lakers as a boogeyman. He's using LA as a boogeyman. He gets his 5-year, $212 million when it comes to it. Does that also change the way that Chicago looks at Zach? He's getting big dollars now. Do they look at Zach and say, and look at the rest of the roster and say, okay, look, maybe we need to focus on building around Zach? And this is why that whole conversation about Zach kind of being on the sidelines and not on the sidelines, but like standing off to the side and watching DeMar take the limelight at the end of the games, it just kind of made me think. Because I wonder if whoever leaked that out or whoever said that, if it was substantiated, if it had any merit to it. Sometimes I wonder if the reason why that was said was because there was a message being sent to the front office like Zach wants to be the feature. Zach wants to be the priority. And if Zach wants to be the feature and the priority, and you have who you have, then maybe DeMar's sort of fit or his long-term fit with the Bulls may not necessarily be there. They may, and remember, Patrick Williams is a guy that they drafted with a high draft pick. He's been asked to play the 4. Where does he fit into this? Where does Lonzo fit into this with his knee situation? Where does Kobe White fit in? Where does Ayo fit in? Where does Nikola Vucevic, who they gave up two first round picks to get, like where does he fit in with this? And so if you're going to commit that kind of money to Zach, the Bulls may turn around and say, look, we need to feature Zach more. It was great that him and DeMar were both playing really well and stuff like that. We liked how it worked, but maybe we need to build, add some more size. We can't play this far downsized. And one of the things that I think I've seen a lot of is Bulls writers and Bulls fans talking about Vucevic's defense, not necessarily him not necessarily being the defender that they needed him to be, even and him having sort of career lows when it came to his shooting from the 3-point line. And it's an adjustment thing, like a lot of players first season when they're injured or there's COVID and stuff like that, it's very hard to build chemistry when you're not on the floor together. And this was a brand new team. For a guy like DeMar, it's nothing because he just gets in the mid-range and he's just going to score. But if some of those opportunities are opportunities that Zach wanted, I could see a situation where the Bulls may look at a guy like Vucevic. They may look at a guy like DeMar DeRozan, and they may turn around and say, okay, look, we made it to the first round. We know that if we get the right role players who can play the right roles, we can be successful. They can be available. So the way I look at this is, if Zach stays with the Bulls, there may be an opportunity for the Lakers to call about DeMar DeRozan. There may be an opportunity for the Lakers to call about Nikola Vucevic, maybe both of the players, and ask, hey, are you interested in moving off of these contracts? Because remember, DeMar still has 2 years left. I think Vucevic is up for an extension, but I'm not quite sure that the Bulls want to give him an extension. And I'll verify it. Actually, what I'll do is I'll pull it up right now so we can actually take a look at it together. So let's take a look at what their cap situation is so you can actually see it. And so let me reduce. And I'll increase. Okay, so let's take a look at the Bulls cap situation here. Hopefully you guys can see it on the stream. So if we expand this out and we take a look at this, so let's take a look at the contracts they have set up. So if Zach gets his $36 million, right, it's going to put the Bulls at about $136 million, as you guys can see here. Now, DeMar is getting paid 27, Nikola is getting paid 22, 33, 32. I think Zach is 28, 29. You can see that Lonzo is a little bit more, Caruso is a little bit. A lot of these guys are in their 20s, but they're all under 30. So when you look at this situation and you're the GM on the team and stuff like that, they could very well just kind of continue running things as they are. But I think one of the things that's going to be really interesting to see is what happens with what they think of Vucevic's extension, what they think of DeMar DeRozan, sort of long-term, if they want to continue playing this style, with the two scoring guards sort of backcourt that they've been playing with, and DeMar's been playing a 3. And we know that they're a really, really good defensive team when Lonzo and Caruso are on the floor. But if either one of them have any issues being on the floor, the defense drops off significantly. So even with Patrick Williams back, they don't necessarily have, and Javonte Green was also a revelation defensively for this team. They don't necessarily have the defensive personnel to continue playing the way that they want to play if any of their defensive guys go down. They have enough scoring. That's not a problem between DeRozan and Zach. So the Bulls may be looking around to see, hey, are there specific wings or are there certain guys out there that can play defense in a manner that is more, play this style of basketball, but be more cohesive? Is it a guy like Jeremy Grant over in Detroit that the Bulls may be targeting and interested in trying to acquire? Is it somebody else altogether? And I think the Lakers' best opportunity, if Zach doesn't necessarily want to come to LA, is to see if DeMar would be interested in joining. if they're interested in moving him, to see if Nikola Vucevic is somebody that they could potentially target. You look at the number, their salary numbers, you're looking at $27 million and $22 million. And then, you have the extra year for DeMar. Well, Russ's contract is about $47 million. And so you could very easily absorb DeMar and Vucevic and send Russ to a third team. So even if it's not Zach, it could end up being somebody like DeMar and Vuce. And if Russ is moved to a third team or whoever he gets moved for, you could end up having a potential lineup of Vucevic, LeBron, Anthony Davis, and DeMar DeRozan, who, if you guys remember, is who everybody was clamoring for. But the other thing is also this. If the Lakers are concerned about the availability of Anthony Davis or the availability of LeBron James, just because they've been sort of injury prone these past few years, well, Vucevic and DeMar DeRozan are excellent 82-game players. They're guys who get the work done in the regular season. And again, I don't know if the Bulls would be interested in doing that, but if they're looking to cut salary and to get out of salary so they could specifically target, younger players or guys that fit within a system that they really want, the Lakers could try and make that possible for them. And you look at the extension situation with Vucevic, you look at the extension situation, or not the extension, like the current contract with DeMar DeRozan. If LeBron extends for 1 year or 2 more years, very easily you could offer them something that allows them to stay there. The Lakers wouldn't get hard capped because they're not getting Zach. You get off of Russ's contract, which I know all Laker fans are despise. If Darvin Ham is the coach, you could see a situation where Anthony Davis and Nick Vucevic sort of fit that sort of Giannis and Brook Lopez mold. I would be a little cautionary. Like, the Lakers would still need to get a high motor big, like a very mobile big, to play in against these 5-out sets. But you could see how that sort of fits together. DeMar's not a floor spacer like that, but he's a mid-range maestro. And we've seen that LeBron can play off the ball. LeBron will take more threes. But DeMar also adds size to the Lakers, and Vucevic adds size to the Lakers that the Lakers just haven't had. And if you think about like the point guard market, if you lose Russ, what does the point guard market look like? Well, there's a couple of guys that are out there. Maybe they bring back DJ Augustine and they have him start. Maybe they wait and look on Eric Bledsoe's situation and see if he gets waived with Portland. And if he gets waived with Portland, there's a guy that's available there. Maybe John Wall gets bought out. I'm not a fan of Wall because I don't know what he looks like, but maybe he can come in and fill in spot starts. So there's a lot of different situations that the Lakers kind of capitalize on. And I think a lot of the conversation has been about, acquiring Zach and getting younger and stuff like that. And it's not that it's not possible. There are limitations that the Lakers would have that would cause that issue. And so one of the reasons why I also have been thinking about this sort of maybe adding DeMar and adding Vooch and them being really good 82-game players to preserve LeBron and preserve Anthony Davis is because of the sentiment. And so on The Athletic, there's the Athletic beat writer for the Bulls is, I think his name is Darnell Mayberry. And I apologize if you watch this and I pronounce his name wrong. So I just want to apologize for that in case I do. But I was reading through just some of the stuff that he had in regards to where the team is going to be at. And these local beat writers do a tremendous job of letting people know just kind of where everybody's at. And so, you're reading through just kind of this segment that he had here about DeMar and just saying, he had a tremendous season, how much DeMar enjoyed being there, what's going to, and just kind of how well he played, the MVP conversation that he had. And then you kind of just see the second part of his analysis. He talks about, the concern about DeRozan's longevity. He's 33 years old. He plays a ton of minutes. Well, the Lakers need a guy who can play a ton of minutes and play a style of basketball that allows him to play a ton of minutes. The other thing is also, whether the fit with DeMar and Zach long-term will work, if there's anything about, like the whole conversation about DeMar getting MVP love is a big deal or not. So in this sort of write-up that he does, he mentions that, DeMar's got to stay. but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the direction that they go in if Zach decides to stay, or if Zach wants to dictate certain things when it comes to the team. And the other reason why I bring up both of those opportunities is because he also talks about Nick Vucevic, right, at the end of it. And one of the things that like was really interesting to me is to hear this conversation about Nick. And so when we think about it, Vucevic allowed the Bulls to play the style of basketball they wanted, which was a lot of DHO. He spaces the floor. He takes the open three when it's available, when it's given to him, that sort of thing. But then the question now sort of became with Vucevic, the question was sort of, can he play defense against certain schemes? Can he be effective? And when I was reading through this, like, it was interesting that the last thing, when in the stay or go situation, the beat writer was saying that Vucevic has to go, and he's making about $22 million a year. So it's not necessarily a bad amount of money. It's not like the $12 million that Brook Lopez is getting, and Brook Lopez is probably a far better defender. But schematically, if you're thinking about it, if the Lakers decide to go and get a guy like Darvin Ham, well, Nick Vucevic might be the right guy to play that center role next to Anthony Davis. And so the Lakers could possibly call. Again, I'm not saying that's the difference between us winning a championship and not winning a championship, but I think that can be the difference between us running an effective offense and us running a non-effective offense, or an offense that sort of has no purpose. And remember, if Vucevic is a high motor big, which means that he's willing to come down the floor, screen every single play, as the first action of screen every single play. He's willing to do the grunt work, grab rebounds, take the open three when he has it. He's not worried about how many shots he gets, that sort of thing. That's the sort of thing that's important. And this last thing is like, I think it's a big deal. Like what it says right here, like the Bulls want to use these last two, and I'll read it out loud. The Bulls want to use Vucevic as an offensive hub, a screen setter and facilitator, shooter and finisher. But the Bulls often missed Vooch in space, and he shot just 31.8% on threes, his lowest rate since the 2017-18 season. Meanwhile, the Bulls should want to upgrade from Vucevic's interior defense and slow-footedness defending on the perimeter. When he rebounds with aggression, makes shots, and hits the open man, Vucevic looks great. But after a full season with this core, it doesn't look like the fit is right. So, again, if Zach wants to come to LA, great. I'm sure the Lakers will try and make it happen. But I think he's probably going to prioritize making the most money that he wants and having, not power, but having influence within the Bulls organization. It seems like the Bulls are committed to him. So if he comes to LA, that's great. I think we'll definitely try and make that happen. And we'll definitely try and call and make that happen. And there are limitations to that with the hard cap and whatnot. But when it comes to the alternatives, if it's not Zach, is there a conversation that we can have with the Bulls? I think there is. I think the Lakers can reach out to the Bulls and ask them what they want to do with DeMar DeRozan, what they want to do with Nikola Vucevic, and try and figure out a way to add depth to the roster. Whether it's moving, Russ's contract to a third team or whatever it is, add depth to the roster that makes sense, that's in line with what the coach wants to do. And remember, Vooch is a player that doesn't necessarily have to play just with Anthony Davis. He's a player who can be on the floor even when Anthony Davis is off the floor. It gives the Lakers a different type of offense that we were hoping to get out of Marc Gasol, honestly. And we weren't able to get out of Marc Gasol because he's an older guy. Vooch is not as mobile, or Vooch is probably more mobile than Marc Gasol, but schematically, Marc Gasol got picked on by really fast guards in the playoffs, and that's what forced the Lakers to have to play Andre Drummond against the Suns and stuff like that. But if Vooch can stay healthy, if Vooch can eat up a lot of minutes at the center spot, that keeps Anthony Davis healthy, that takes the offensive workload off of Anthony Davis, and if he fits within a scheme that a guy like Darvin Ham may want to play, or even Terry Stotts may want to play with all the pick and roll stuff that he does, I think it's something that the Lakers are going to try and explore, and I think it's an opportunity that makes a lot of sense for the Lakers to try and explore. I'd love to get DeMar and Vooch if we're going to move off of Russ's contract, because assuming the Bulls want to let him go, or and they want to go in a different direction, and I'd like that because those guys are great 82 game players, perfect 82 game players to play next to LeBron James. A high volume scorer that can score. He's better at 3-point scorer, but more or less at two levels, gets to the rim, can take mid range, and another post up big, can shoot the three. It gives you some insurance if Anthony Davis doesn't find his jumper, that you have a big man that can spread the floor for situations where you need to spread the floor. And of course, Vucevic is a willing screener. Every time I see him play, he's almost screening every single possession. He doesn't even need to be called on. Like, he'll just go and screen for the ball handler every single time. Those kind of things are important if we bring back a guy like Malik Monk, for a guy like Austin Reeves, or whichever guards are, whoever our starting point guard and two guard are at the start of next season. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I think this situation with Zach Lavine and Clutch and all that sort of stuff is going to be very interesting to see just kind of how it all plays out. But if it doesn't work out in our favor, or for whatever reason, I honestly think Zach will stay. If he ends up staying, that's totally cool. But there is an opportunity there, and we've seen many times before that, and then we're seeing it with Portland and this Damian Lillard situation. Once a star franchise, once a team commits to a franchise guy, they're going to try and build around that franchise guy, and whatever the core was at the time may not necessarily be the core moving forward. And those opportunities are opportunities that can change. In a single year, a team can completely change the landscape of how they want to play and what they want to do. So I think Laker fans, very optimistic Laker fans, would love to get Zach. They can see the lines. They can draw all the lines between Clutch and Zach and Rich Paul and LeBron. And they can draw the lines between a UCLA college basketball player and a guy who just loves to be in LA, that sort of thing. But there's always more opportunity if you're looking at it the right way. And I think no matter what happens with Levine's situation in Chicago, the Lakers should try and have open conversations to see if a team like Chicago wants to move off of a big like Nick Vucevic, because I think that would help the Lakers go a long way. And so appreciate everybody who joined. Appreciate everybody, or not joined, but whoever watches. If you guys can if you guys can subscribe, it really helps the channel. We're up to 170 subscribers, which is pretty awesome. I didn't expect to get this much traction, but you guys have been kick-ass. You guys have been awesome. The feedback, I read all the comments. I try to respond to the comments. You guys are wonderful. I hope this stuff, I hope I don't sound boring. I hope this brings a lot of levity to all of these free agent conversations and stuff like that. And honestly, this is a way better experience than Twitter. Because Twitter's, if I share something on Twitter, it goes in so many different directions by people who try to weaponize my tweets for whatever their agenda is. And so this has been much more enjoyable, and I'm hoping to build a community here. So if you can subscribe, if you can share it, if you can like it, I'd appreciate it. It'll help the channel go very far. And other than that, I'll see you on the timeline if you follow me on Twitter, or I'll see you in the next video. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day.